Thanks a lot, Casey. I really appreciate it. So let's get started. Okay, so these are the objectives for our program today. We're going to define advocacy. We're going to identify the 3 types of advocacy. We're going to list 1 developmental characteristic of each age range that affects their ability to advocate. Articulate the 4-step framework for individual or self-advocacy that we created. Apply the framework to real-world examples, and then our ultimate goal really is to teach your child to self-advocate when they are ready. So what is advocacy? Speaking out about something that you care about, an injustice, a right, an issue that you see or experience in order to make a positive change.
Cindy, excuse me, we can't see your slides. It says loading.
Oh.
We saw them before.
Is this working? Do stop share. Let's do new share.
There we go.
Great. Thank you. Very sorry. So types of advocacy. Self-advocacy, where you're standing up for yourself or defending your rights. Individual advocacy, where you're speaking out on behalf of someone else, promoting or defending their rights. Or systems or policy advocacy, where you're speaking out in order to change policies, laws, or rules that affect large numbers of people. So today we're going to focus on self and individual advocacy in the 1 hour that we have. So key questions for, oops, go back. Key questions. So hold on 1 second. Can you get rid of that? Great. To help us understand what we know about, no, this is bad. I'm sorry. When do I advocate on behalf of my child, and when do I encourage and support my child's self-advocacy? So this is not a black and white continuum, not a black and white issue. It's really a continuum. There's a lot of nuance. And as your child gets older, this is sort of a delicate dance. We also depend a lot on your particular child. Are they shy or outgoing? Are they independent, or do they want your help? Next. So it helps to understand what we know about child development, because developmental characteristics can really affect your child's desire and ability to advocate. For younger elementary kids, they look to caregivers and parents for help and guidance. They're beginning to understand social rules. They may experience new emotions like shame and guilt and pride. They form friendships, and they're beginning to be more mindful of the emotions of others. For older elementary kids, they begin to show more independence from parents and family, begin to express more preferences. They can be emotional about small problems, and they're beginning to understand more about their place in the world. Here are a few cartoons to illustrate some of this. So, you know, my daughter is going to be late to school because the bump in her sock has caused a complete meltdown. You know, kids ask lots of questions. So we have the Guinness Book of Questions, and, you know, the elementary age kids, you know, might need your help a lot of the time, and, you know, might be inconvenient sometimes. So that's kind of the characterization of elementary age kids. Now, what about preteens? So preteens show more concern about body image and looks. They're more moody. They show more interest in and influenced by peer groups. They're feeling stress, maybe from more challenging schoolwork. And we know they pay more attention to friendships and peer relationships, perhaps, than their parents. And they want to be liked and accepted by their friends. So a few little cartoons about preteens. Hope you can read the one with the junior high insurance up top. And let's go to the next slide. Now, what about teenagers? So they have more interest, of course, in romantic relationships and sexuality. They're showing more independence from their parents and spending less time with parents and more time with friends. Also begin showing more concern about schoolwork and maybe future work plans. We found a lot of cartoons about teenagers. There's just a few of them I'm going to read because I just love them, which is, the classic favorites. You don't understand and you never will, but everyone else is allowed to do this, and I'll do it in a minute. Or how to ruin your teen's entire life. Volunteer at a school event. Take the family on a weekend trip. Insist on a family dinner on a Friday night and accidentally glance at his or her phone when he or she is on Snapchat. So you can look at some of the others, but I'm sure many of you with teenagers will identify with a lot of these. Next. So next, we're going to talk about sort of a 4-step framework for advocating with and for your child. And each of those are going to have different issues depending on the age of your child. All of this information will be available afterwards on resources that US Pain will have available, and we'll also make them available for Miles for Migraine. So don't worry too much about taking notes. And also, we're going to go through the framework, and then we're going to actually put it into action with scenarios. So don't worry too much about capturing every aspect of this, because I think you're going to see how it works when we go through the scenarios. So the first one is gathering the facts. Try to stay calm, even though your situation that requires advocacy that your child presents might be something that gets you a little upset. Stay calm and make sure you have the full picture. Listen to your kids' viewpoints and ask questions. If it's an elementary age kid, there is high likelihood that you're going to need to talk to adults to find out, the full picture. Middle-aged school kids are getting much better at giving you information, and asking questions and listening is great. With high school kids, they're likely to give you all the information, but you're going to need to ask them questions likely to fill in the gaps. So on each of these, we have sort of some tips for the framework. In the first step, you might want to ask yourself some questions. What's my initial instinct tell me? And, am I making assumptions about some of the other people involved in the situation? If needed, as I mentioned, ask your kids questions to get more information. Do I need to advocate, or is my child capable of advocating in this situation? Certainly in the elementary age kids, the likelihood is that you're going to really need to participate. Next step in the framework is brainstorming possible accommodations or making exceptions. So thinking of all the ways your child could participate rather than feel left out, and then find out what's realistic by discussing it, perhaps, with particularly elementary age kids, with other adults involved before talking with your kid about possible solutions. So if you're elementary age, as I mentioned, perhaps it's a coach you need to talk to find out more about possible accommodations. Perhaps it's a camp situation where you need to find out about more, possibilities that you're thinking of before you present them to your child. If it's middle school age, they can help brainstorm possibilities that they're willing to do. Try to be positive but realistic when talking about their ideas. And for high school age, they can generate all possible ideas, probably. You brainstorm together with them, but let them do most of the work. And here's some tips for step 2. Realize that non-action is also a possibility, and that action is a continuum. Are there ways that you can partially participate? Can your child participate in a different way? When talking about the alternative options with your child, don't dismiss the disappointment of the situation. Not being able to participate fully can really be a bummer, but also don't dwell in the sadness of it. Acknowledge their feelings, but lead them to offer positive future-focused solutions. And then this is one tip from Nikki, which is use the language of and rather than but, because but is sort of making less of the situation they're going to have to face and changing things. But you can say, I understand how disappointing it is to miss Saturday's meet, and we have another meet next week to look forward to, or next month to look forward to, rather than but. In the third step of the framework is when you choose a course of action. So if you're an elementary age child, a good idea is to present a couple of options and let your child feel a sense of agency about picking the option that they prefer. With a middle school child, if an idea that your child has come up with is doable, I would try to make that one work if possible, even though it might not be something that you choose, because I think you really want to boost their confidence that they're going to be able to handle these situations in the future. And if it's high school, really, it's time to let your child really make the choice if they're feeling comfortable with that, and offer really supportive comments and options to talk about it further if your child's interested. And here's some tips for step 3. With all kids, especially preteens and teens, acknowledge that the issue is important to them, and it may not be easy to implement the action plan, but they can do it. Again, giving them confidence. Emphasize that no option's perfect, and you can also change course, or if you figure it out a different way, or another idea comes to you about how to handle it. Consider the best way to approach whoever it is. So you might have a very different approach if it's a teacher versus a doctor or a coach, and offer to role play the discussion with whomever is in charge of it, whether it's the teacher or the coach, with your preteen or teen. Role playing can be a really valuable way to work it out. And then the fourth step of the framework is really closing the loop, evaluating how it went and modifying it if necessary. Afterwards, talking about what did and didn't go well, because we want your child to see this as a learning experience. And, if it was successful, a really confidence boosting, empowering experience for your child. With elementary age kids, you're going to ask direct questions and offer praise. With middle school, maybe more open-ended questions about how things went and let them share what's comfortable. And with your high school child, well, some kids will talk more if they feel it comes, from them rather than being grilled. But you can also bring up something related, or, something, of a similar topic, to see if they're willing to talk about, what happened in the situation where they, advocated for themselves. So at this point, we are going to talk about scenarios, and I'm going to turn it over to Nikki to tell you more about those scenarios.
All right, so on the following slides, we are going to read, and we'll also have it up on the slides for you all to read, 3 example scenarios. We have one for elementary age, one for preteen, and one for teen. And we'll be selecting one of these scenarios to talk through together. If we have time, we may be able to do more than one. So on the following slides, I'll read and it will show the scenarios. And if folks could type in the chat, either 1 for scenario 1, 2 for scenario 2, or 3 for scenario 3, of which one you feel like may be most relevant to your family that you'd like us to start with, that would be great. And then we'll know where we should begin. So here's our elementary scenario. Your 8-year-old son really wants to go to sports camp this summer. His 2 older brothers have gone to this outdoor day camp and loved it. He wants to sign up. He's an athletic kid, but unlike his older brothers, heat, direct sun, and exertion are migraine triggers for him. And for our middle school scenario, your daughter, your daughter is on a travel gymnastics team and she loves it. She's a good gymnast, but migraines have caused her to miss a number of practices lately. The team has a big travel meet she is excited about. She comes home and tells you the coach says kids who haven't been at practice consistently this season won't be competing at the travel meet. The coach said kids have been blowing off practice and the spots are for kids who show commitment to the team. And here is our high school age scenario. This is scenario number 3. Your daughter is taking AP biology. She has great grades and cares a lot about getting into the college of her choice. Her AP bio class has a number of required labs, which she's been missing. The bright lights and smells in the labs have contributed to her migraines. She's done well on the tests, but with missing graded in-class labs, she's distraught that she now has a C in the class. And for this particular scenario, we are assuming that the migraines began recently and thus she doesn't have an IEP or a 504 set up. So the first scenario was the elementary age student with the sports camp. The second scenario was the middle school age student with the gymnastics team. And the third scenario is the high schooler in AP biology. So if you could just type into the chat 1, 2, or 3, which one feels most relevant that you'd like to start with, that would be great.
So Casey?
Yeah, I'm reading them now. It looks like 2 has the most, and then short, maybe like one person behind would be number 3.
Okay.
So why don't we start with 2 then, and I'll reread it. Let's go back and reread it one more time. So everyone, whoops, sorry, wrong direction. So number 2 was a middle school aged child. Your daughter is on the travel gymnastics team and she loves it. She's a good gymnast, but migraines have caused her to miss a number of practices lately. The team has a big travel meet she is excited about. She comes home and tells you the coach says kids who haven't been at practice consistently this season won't be competing at the travel meet. The coach said kids have been blowing off practice and the spots are for kids who show commitment to the team. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to flip back to the framework and we're going to talk through it together. And so we really want for this to be interactive. So feel free to raise your virtual hand or actual hand and then unmute yourself to participate because we're going to work through the different steps together for this hypothetical situation. All right, so step 1. So in this situation, our first step is that we are gathering information and trying to get the facts. So in the gymnastics scenario, please feel free to participate by raising your hand or raising your virtual hand. What are some things you would need to know to be able to support your child in advocating and help your child, your middle school age child? Who might you need to contact? What might you need to find out in this situation?
Katie Moran is raising her hand.
Go for it.
Well, so I would make sure that either does the middle child speak to the coach directly about their migraine?
Right.
So that's an option, which if your middle child is comfortable doing, then you can talk to the child about, their willingness to do that. We figured that probably it's going to be you. They're going to have to talk to the coach because it's a little bit of a tough situation that a middle schooler might feel uncomfortable doing.
Right.
Does
So
that...
then, yeah, to me, the coach would need to know that your child isn't intentionally blowing practice off.
Right.
Right.
So when gathering information, maybe some of the things you need to find out is does the coach know? Is the coach assuming that my child is blowing practice off? Has my daughter ever said anything to the coach? Have I said anything to the coach?
Right.
Yeah.
And are we assuming in this scenario as well that the child doesn't have a IEP or 503 or any of that?
Well, so
Or was
this
that just the
is,
high
this
school?
is a travel gymnastics. And
Oh,
so
this is
it
travel.
doesn't
Okay, so this
relate
doesn't have to
to
do with school. Okay,
Correct.
correct. Okay,
So the only one that really does have to do with school is the high school
the
age.
high school.
Doesn't have.
Gotcha.
to do.
Okay. Okay.
Other information that people might want to gather about the situation?
If you don't know how to raise your hand, you can just unmute yourself and say the comments too.
Yeah, absolutely. Or just put on your video and, do the old fashioned way and raise your hand.
So somebody wrote in the chat, Cindy, what is the situation with other kids blowing off practice?
Great.
Definitely. When we came up with the scenario, we talked about, from the coach's view, they might not know why kids are not at practice and might assume that if, let's say, middle school age kids are skipping practice for other social events, they might make assumptions that your child is skipping it for those reasons as well, which wouldn't be the case, but,
Right. So, my instinct when we first, came up with this scenario was, oh my God, I'm so angry. The coach thinks my kid is blowing this off and my kid is so conscientious. But actually, like you're pointing out, the coach may realize there's many reasons why kids are skipping it. But one of the things that Nikki and I talked about was I immediately assumed, well, if she's not doing it purposely, then the coach should let her participate. But then Nikki said, what about if it's a safety issue? When you talk to the coach and you gather the information and you find out the reason why the coach will not allow her to participate or other kids to participate if they miss practice is because it's an issue of a danger. If they don't know how to do the move and they miss the practice in learning how to do the move, then, I can see why they have those rules. But I wouldn't have thought of that. That wouldn't be my first instinct to have thought of that. And that's why we want to say it's important to gather all the information. So it's really important to talk to the coach to find out why they have the rules that they do or how much flexibility is in those rules. So why don't we move on to the next step?
Okay, Cindy, I just wanted to say you had two more comments that were put in. It says, who makes the policy, the gym or the coach? And then somebody else said, what alternative options for participating are there? Like traveling with the team at low involvement or supporting in another way?
Fabulous. Those are great. And those are important things to get information to gather so that you can generate possible accommodations.
And I like the comment about the gym or the coach, because in some situations, the person you're talking to might not be the one who gets to make the final say-so or decision. So that's another great point that people brought up. In the second step, we are brainstorming. So the person that put this in the chat, you're on to the second step. It's a nice transition. Brainstorming different possibilities, such as the example of, could your child travel with the team, but perhaps not necessarily compete yet? What other ways could they be involved? And, the older your child is, the more they can take an active role in helping you brainstorm the possibilities, finding out what's realistic. What are different brainstorming ideas people have about ways your child might be able to participate in this scenario?
So again, you can raise your hand, you can come off a mute. You can use the chat. Any other ideas you have for how your child could still participate, even though there is this rule that the coach has, and the coach, is pretty much sticking to that for safety reasons.
Well, they can keep track of the scores. I think in gymnastics, aren't there scores for the
There-
team?
Mhm.
And they can make sure everybody has water and stays hydrated, that type of thing.
Right, right. So while this situation, that the problem is that your daughter wants to compete, but has missed the practices. So in
Right.
the future, if they have migraines and they need to miss the practice, are there other ways, perhaps?
Yeah, so she could be the person, like handing out water to the people when they're done, their little routine.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like
Um,
giving them a specific job, so they
Yeah.
feel the role.
Yep,
Yep. Any other?
cheering them on, a cheerleader.
Yep.
You always need cheerleaders. I don't know, I'm thinking of my kids' sports. My kids are older now, so
Great.
It's-
That,
That
thanks,
if the kid
Katie.
wants to
That's
Participate, which, it's not unlike when you're in the classroom, all kids want to participate, or they maybe don't want to be in school, but they have to participate. The child should be allowed to have accommodations in the whatever you call it, the performance, where they would have maybe something that's not quite as skilled, but they should be allowed to do something that they're capable of.
Yep. Oh, that could be something that you propose. The only issue might be, well, these travel meets, are usually have rules for the whole league. But there's certainly bringing up accommodations for kids that have these issues that the league might not have considered before, Shirley, would be great.
I saw someone also put in the chat all their alternative or makeup practices available, perhaps if your child had a migraine during the regular practices, but they could propose sometimes to come to the gym a different time to learn the moves or do some practice materials at home. I think
That's a really fabulous idea. One of the things we talked about too was the possibility that there's an assistant coach that might be able to offer other times to practice those moves for kids that weren't able to make the practice for whatever reason. And that there's often assistant coaches at some of these, travel teams. And so perhaps that's an option.
And I think also like here with a middle school age kid, when you're brainstorming with your child, try to encourage your child to think of different possibilities, because especially with junior high age kids who have strong opinions about what they are or not okay with, they might feel more inclined to say, oh yeah, I would be okay with, scoring it, but I don't want to hand out water. And, middle schoolers care a lot about what their friends think. So sometimes a solution that might seem good to you, they might like or not like based on various social things that middle schoolers care about. Should we move on to the next step? So then in this step, we are choosing a course of action. So in this scenario, if possible, if there's a possibility that the coach or the gym or whoever the decision maker has said is okay, that even better if it's one that your child has come up with, because that can be really empowering for them, then that is the one that you could go with. Prior to the step, you'd probably have to find out from the coach, from the gym, from whoever's in charge of what they are and are not willing and able to accommodate, and make that decision together.
That's good. And then last step.
And then in our last step, we are evaluating how it went and modifying if necessary. So ideally to have like a discussion, let's say that your child was able to do makeup practices and then compete, or that your child had a different role in the gymnastics performance, being able to have a discussion with your child about how they felt it went, just both from like a physical standpoint of their migraines, but also how they felt about it on the team. It can be an empowering experience if it was successful. I think with middle schoolers as well as high schoolers, they might respond better if you ask open-ended questions about what they thought, rather than like, well, how did it go when you were on the side, or how did it go when you talked to the coach on this day that I told you? They can feel like they're being grilled. But if it's asked in a more open-ended way, that can be really helpful, and they might learn something from the experience that they can carry forward or feel more empowered that with your help, they're able to speak up for themselves and participate as much as possible. So.
Great. So we were thinking, first of all, does anybody have any questions on this particular scenario? But it looks like we have time to do another one. And so I think Casey, you said that the third
one. So
Oh.
like the AP biology one.
Great.
Why don't I reread that just because it's been a little while? So.
Sure, but maybe before we jump into that, though, I did like the idea of seeing if anybody did have any questions about the scenario or anything that you had gone over prior before we jump into the third one, if
Great
you
idea.
wanted to.
Thanks. Anyone?
Bueller?
Don't be shy.
All right, maybe not.
Okay.
All right. So this third scenario is for a high schooler. Your daughter is taking AP biology. She has great grades and cares a lot about getting into the college of her choice. Her AP bio class has a number of required labs, which she's been missing. The bright lights and smells in the lab have contributed to her migraines. She's done well on the tests, but with missing graded in-class labs, she's distraught that she has a C right now in the class. And for this scenario, we're assuming she doesn't have a 504 or an IEP, which would be a legally binding document, giving your child accommodations for the class. Perhaps her migraines are more of a recent thing. So I will skip back to the first step. So in this scenario, what are, and just like before, feel free to type, to just come off mute and participate. What pieces of information would you need in this scenario? Who might you need to talk to? Where could you find this information to get a full picture in this scenario?
So somebody just typed in, is she comfortable talking to the teacher one-on-one or with a parent advocate accompanying, discussing the migraine situation and what she thinks may help?
That's great. So absolutely, that's, it's a high school age kid. They probably or might not want you involved. They might feel totally comfortable about talking to the teacher. You could offer to role play those conversations ahead of time so that they're even more comfortable with it. You could talk through, what possible options there might be, what questions you have for the teacher.
In a school-based scenario about their grade too, you might need more information about the class, like when do grades close? Are there extra credit or makeup opportunities? How much do the labs count for versus the tests? Various information like that, just about the actual structure of the class.
Any other info that you could gather?
So someone wrote, will a medical note suffice for makeups?
Yes.
Yep.
Great.
Maybe the physical layout of the lab room, like are all the windows closed? Different things like that.
Right. When you begin to sort of ask about what could be done with your kid and, you're talking about accommodations like Nikki said, could they turn the lights off? Like, as she said, right. If they open the windows, can they wear sunglasses? Great. Great ideas.
Someone made a great point too, similar to the gymnastics, about understanding who even is in a position to make accommodations. Does the whole science department or the school have a blanket grading policy? Is it up to the individual teacher? Is a great point. Like when you're talking to someone, you have to know who has the power to even make the accommodation. Should we move on to the second?
Sure.
So brainstorming possibilities. Maybe watch a video instead of doing that. That's a good one. School nurse. Different ways. Now in this one, it says your child participate, but really would be your child participate in labs or are able to bring up their grade in a way that's also healthy for them. So what someone said to watch a video instead of doing the lab. Other ideas of what your child might be able to do to help with the science situation.
This one is good too. You want to get somebody that understands migraines, like the school nurse involved, or maybe the student has talked to the school nurse or potentially a counselor about it. And, they could potentially help with the science teacher understanding it better. Good ideas. Other accommodations or ideas that you might talk about with your child? So somebody said, I never knew about IEP or 503 for migraine. So we're going to give you lots of resources at the end, but you may have heard of Migraine at School, which is a CHAMP program that has some fabulous information about IEPs and 503s. Why don't we step through the rest of the scenario, and then I know Nikki is very familiar with 503s and IEPs, so she can talk to you about it. I know a little bit about the laws behind them. So maybe go to the next.
Sure. I just want to address one thing. Someone asked a great question about a temp status while working on getting an IEP or it's called a 504. That's not an IEP or a 504, but I saw that Migraine at School does have like a health accommodation form.
Mm-hmm.
And so, any accommodations that are in an IEP or a 504, those are legally binding documents, but that's not to say that there's not other written or verbal ways of getting accommodations in the meantime, or even instead of an extra paper.
Yep, Katie had another good
Test from
idea.
home, extra credit, other ways to make up the work or to modify the assignments. So in step 3, choosing a course of action. So I think probably in this scenario, the course of action would really depend on talking to the teacher.
And your child, what is the thing that they most feel comfortable with? It really depends on your child and how comfortable they are with, things like, making accommodations just for them, like turning the lights down or opening the windows, versus asking for extra credit or working through some additional work in order to make up some of the dings that they've gotten because they haven't participated in the labs. So again, because it's a high school kid, you really want to let them, be the driver here of the possible solution and course of action, if possible.
And, for a high schooler, let's say they do feel comfortable talking to the teacher, they might need your support in doing something like writing an email to the teacher about when to meet with the teacher, or they might need your guidance in telling them like appropriate times and ways to approach the teacher. They might need you to role play it with them. So, that support would really come like on the back end at home, and then they would be doing more of the advocating in school.
And as somebody had suggested, if this really is a school policy or the head of the Department of Biology or Science at the school, and that's a policy they've created, as these, sort of stakes get higher, your child may feel less comfortable talking to more people in authority. So, you might offer to go with them or, to write the questions out ahead of time with them. Again, role playing is good. If there is a person at the school that the student has a relationship with, maybe an assistant principal, and they want to enlist that person, that's another idea for how they can approach this situation. As they're getting older like this and potentially might be off to college at some point, they really need to know how to negotiate all these different situations. So, encouraging them and giving them confidence to do some of this on their own is really important. And then finally, the last one.
Step 4.
Mhm.
In step 4, we're closing the loop and evaluating how it went. So if you're able to have a conversation with your high schooler, perhaps at the end of the semester or after the next lab or grading period, about how it went, about what they learned, about how that'll be helpful for them. Again, maybe asking an open-ended question about how they feel that semester of biology went for them, rather than grilling them on like, how did it go on Tuesday when you talked to the teacher and you said the things I said to say, or something like that. They might be more willing to talk about it. And I think, like with the other scenarios, if they are able to work something out about how to bring their grade up in a way that's like also healthy for them, it could be a really empowering experience.
That you give them lots of praise for. The other thing that's really important, I think, to emphasize here is flexibility, so that, if that first option didn't work out so well, trying something else, trying one of the other options, going back and speaking to the teacher again, it might take a little bit of time and a little different accommodations to work through in order to make the situation work for your child. So, again, I really encourage them to have that kind of flexibility and be willing to sort of, switch directions and find another accommodation, because persistence with a disability and, really trying to try another way, keep at it, is really important, because they're going to need that skill.
We had a really good question. If a child's resistant to talking, would it be appropriate to discreetly reach out to staff? That's a tricky one.
It is a tricky one, because you kind of almost don't want to go around your kid. So I don't know, that's pretty tricky. I mean, what do other people think about that?
I think it almost depends on why are they not talking? Are they not talking because they're embarrassed or they're ashamed? Are they not talking because they don't know? Like, getting to the root of like why they don't want to talk about it, or do they feel like they're going to get treated differently if people know that they have migraine? So I think trying to figure out maybe the reason why they're not speaking would help to answer that question a little better.
Yep. Yeah.
Definitely.
Okay. So I see that it is 7:48. So I'd like to, Nikki's going to these pages of resources for you.
Resources.
So let's go to some questions. We will supply these resources, but let's see if anybody has questions or even a scenario that they wanted some help with.
And again, you guys can just unmute or type it in if you do.
Yep, type into the chat, raise your hand, use the little icon. Any questions about anything we talked about, or
So Cindy, I mean, I know that it's Casey. I know that, just to get people's brains thinking. So for those that don't know, my son is visually impaired. I know it's not the same as migraine, but we ran into a situation with biology and him having to look through a microscope. For those who don't know, visually impaired can't really look through a microscope. And so the teacher gave us a hard time and was like, well, no, that's what he has to do. And it ended up that we had to go above the teacher to go to the head of the department. And it was his idea to come up with, they printed out what the slides were supposed to look like, and that way they could enlarge them for him. So sometimes it really was a matter of, for him, we had to figure out, but he had the option to come up with a solution too. And I know it's not the same, but he felt very good about that. He came up with the solution for that.
That's great. That's absolutely terrific. I see that somebody wanted tips for migraine care in medical situations. And, again, I think it depends a lot on the age of the child. So, I would use the framework again, which is, if you're, let's say, a high school student and they feel that their physician is not really listening to them, is that the sort of thing that you're talking about in medical situations? I don't know who it is that, let's that asked that question. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you're talking about? You can type it in or you can speak, because we'd love to address that. Any response there? I mean, my first thought, oh, well, let's see, here it is. They either don't listen right or don't understand migraines. Yep, that's kind of what I was thinking. Yeah, I mean, that's sadly, you know, with any type of pain, people often aren't believed. And if kids are using this, you know, they say they have migraines or they have headaches, they often can get doubted. I totally understand that. And so again, I would use the framework, you know, which is to talk to your child, whether it's, you know, whatever age the child is, about what their feelings are about that situation with the doctor or the nurse practitioner, or whoever it is that's not listening to them, and then brainstorming with them possible ways to approach it. Do they feel comfortable talking to the doctor? Or if not, will you be the one to speak to the doctor for them? And, you know, they're probably going to run into this sort of situation later if they're a high schooler. So you might want to role play with them, conversations that you could have with the doctor about the migraines, and the fact about what it's done to their life. Because if they don't understand that, you know, what migraine can do to people, that it's not often just, as you all know, it's not often just head pain. People could be nauseous, you could be throwing up, you could be having all kinds of other symptoms with it that are just really affecting your life. And, you know, I think explaining that to the doctor might really be helpful. Let's see, it says absences are a huge problem. Yep. Can they excuse absences with a 504 plan? So why don't we talk a little bit about the 504 if we have time? You know, I see we have like 2 minutes left. Nikki, you want to just overview 504 versus IEP?
Sure. So both 504s and IEPs are school-based, legally binding documents. IEPs are typically, your student will get accommodations listed in IEP, which stands for Individualized Education Plan, under different categories. And someone here mentioned that migraine can fall into the other health category. There's like a developmental delay category, there autism category, and the way a student gets an IEP is they have an evaluation, usually at school, and then a meeting to determine if they're eligible for the IEP, and if so, what modifications, accommodations, and services are they eligible for. A 504 is similarly a school-based document, but what's different about it is it doesn't necessarily have the same school-based academic evaluations, and it can often be used more for a health condition. So for example, I've had students with severe food allergies who may have a 504 plan for that. And some of these resources here, some great migraine at school and some things from your American Headache Society talk about sample IEPs, a migraine health plan, which is not an IEP or a 504, but is like a form to provide possible accommodations.
I will just mention that, you know, the IEP is actually, both of those are from laws, right? So an IEP is the IDEA Act. So you can look that up online. And 504 is actually Section 504 of the Americans with Disability Act. So one of them is a school-based document. The other one is a general law for the ADA. So it's less school oriented, and like Nikki said, it could be for situations like migraine more applicable when your child is not, let's say, in a developmental delay, but has an impairment, you know, like migraine, that will affect their ability to show up at school or to participate fully, but don't have learning issues per se. So can they excuse that? Yes, with a 504. Yeah, I mean, so absences are definitely a part of these plans, given that the particular disability that your child has. And I think absences would probably be both part of the IEP or the 504, depending on which one you pursued with a child with migraines. A lot of times with pain, there are co-occurring disabilities. And so migraine might not be the only disability that child has. I know a lot of people with other pain conditions have migraines as well. So there might be another reason as well why they need the IEP. I think that's it for our time, because I know we wanted to go over other, I guess you have a survey, Sarah, or something else that you wanted to go over. So I'm going to turn it back to Casey and/or Sarah at this point, and we can stop sharing.
Great, thank you so much. I just noticed I'm in the dark now. Sorry, I was in a room that had light before and my son said, so I missed that. So anyways, thank you so much to Cindy and to Nikki. You guys really had some great examples and really, I think, got a lot of people's minds flowing with all of this. It's so much information and so much to think about, and we appreciate you taking the time to come on and go over all of this with us. Thank you also to the participants for engaging in this event and our chat. And a final item before we end, I do have a survey that I will be putting in. As I said, we appreciate your feedback on how we can improve anything, or if you loved the event also, we like to hear that. So I'll put that in, and once you guys do that, that concludes our program for this evening. We appreciate you coming. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.